Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Newmark. This is our week 2 highlights video. There's a lot to cover in this video, so I'm going to see how long it's going to take me. Hopefully not more than 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this week's readings soon, but the first thing I want to do is tell you a little bit about how our class is organized. So this is an intro to the discipline of technical and professional communication with an eye towards what's happening in industry. However, since we are in a university, everything that we're doing is inflected by like academic history of the study of technical and professional communication, and more sort of theoretical inquiries and sometimes a more cultural studies approach to technical communication. You can see how this is demonstrated in the fact that like I don't necessarily teach you to use any specific technologies or workflows as they might in a technical communication workplace. I'm more trying to inculcate habits of mind and arm you with a knowledge of the discipline's history. I think that's very important. So I've organized the class in these 4 major units. So the first one is the history and future of technical communication. We can't know where we're going if we don't know where we've been. Of course, in the age of AI, this seems like a very monumental pivot point for this field, but there have been other like very monumental pivot points too. So if we think about this one as just sort of another very transformative era, then it will help us better understand how this field is adapted through these other eras. So technical communication and science, positivism, engineering, and technology. The readings this week already sort of clued you into how these ideas and these other traditions have informed the practice of technical and professional communication. Facts, the presentation of technical information and designing for humans. I'm very interested in technical communication as a humanism. That's how I practice. And it's important to say, however, that we don't only design for humans. We have to be responsible to non-human users potentially. I don't mean aliens. I mean, sometimes we're designing for dogs, right? Or cats, or we're designing for humans of the future, perhaps. And sometimes we're designing for environmental safety or responsible use of natural resources. So humans, of course, are in the mix to carry out projects and processes. However, I think it's a little reductive to just say designing for humans. I'm pretty fixated lately on the term like human-centered design, and like what else do we mean when we're talking about design? Usually it's usually design for humans, but I just think that that concept is really compelling and multifaceted. So in that unit, the third one, looking at how we present technical information, different strategies for doing that, multimodal strategies is something that we will cover. And then finally, TPC ethics. Of course, ethics is threaded through everything we do this year, or this, well, carrying through to the end of the calendar year, December, the end of our course. And then community engagement. What does it mean to be a community engaged practitioner? And what do we know and how do we attend to international realities of the work that technical communicators do, especially if they're working for big technology companies? The international dimensions are crucial to attend to, not as an afterthought, but as part of the very design of communications. So that's just the broad description of some of the themes we'll discuss this semester. So then you have this journal that you're going to be writing in every week. It's online. You will submit it to me as a link to a blog or a Tumblr or a website that you build. I don't care. Or if you just do it like in Google Docs or as a doc, just share it to me as a Google Docs link or as a PDF upload. But really, I hope you avail yourself of some of the amazing tools to make it both visually interesting and a convenient repository for your thoughts about our readings. So that's the Technical and Professional Communication in the Wild journal. And in the wild means I'm wanting you to connect the readings that we're doing to TPC as you see it, like in the wild, as you're living your life, examples that you may interact with. So you're all doing a presentation that's described in a prompt and described in the syllabus itself. So you can read more about that. And then we have a few major assignments in this class, and I will provide you with full prompts and rubrics for those. Okay, so this week we're discussing 4 articles. That's kind of a lot. And they're listed in the syllabus in this order: Durack, O'Hara, Buehler, and Allen, but I'm not going to discuss them in that order in this presentation. I actually don't go into talking about sewing patterns in this presentation, but I love vintage sewing patterns. I sew from them quite often. It's actually this shirt, in fact, I sewed from a not super old vintage pattern, but still a vintage pattern. I love to sew, and I think that's why I love the Allen and the Durack readings so much. I've taught them many times. I think they're really amazing. And so there's an image here also on the screen of an illustration from a vintage Joy of Cooking from the late 1960s. This is, in fact, the one that my mom got when she got married. And so I have her copy, I have my husband's mother's copy, and I have at least a facsimile edition of every edition of the Joy of Cooking. So I love thinking about recipes as examples that we engage with all the time of technical communication, because it's basically a chemistry experiment that we carry out in our kitchens with regularity. So the last one we're going to talk about today is that Jo Allen reading where she talks about recipes and cookbooks. Okay, so let's jump in. Okay, so this article by O'Hara I've assigned like a million times to undergraduate students and graduate students. So he lays out the history of recording scientific practices and documenting technological procedures, such as software documentation. It's really interesting that he projects back a multi-thousand-year history of software documentation. Of course, he's not talking about like a digital technology, but how we basically record a process so that it can be replicated by other people. And he traces that genealogy very far back. So there's a picture here of, I'm not going to say this perfectly, but Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, and he is sort of the father of of algebra, right? And O'Hara identifies him as this sort of forerunner of scientific documentation. And I think it's really important for us to realize that what we think of as this very modern second half of the 20th century profession does have its history dating back very, very far, as connected to mathematics, laboratory science, government-funded research, and he identifies that government-funded research dates back perhaps longer than we imagined. So technical writing has these histories that are very multifaceted and perhaps much more dynamic and international than we may have thought. In the later pages of his article, he really traces a very US-centric history of technical and professional communication. But anyway, so from Gutenberg to Manutius to Erasmus, he talks about this important arc in the history of printing and technical editing. So there's a picture here of Johannes Gutenberg's workshop, and you can see this printing press depicted in the back, and you see the movable type sitting on this bench. They do have at the Albuquerque Public Library archival location on Central, they do have a historic printing press, and I've always wanted to take students in there to check it out, but I've never done it. So if any of you want to take the initiative and like organize a field trip for us, I would love to go see. In my visual rhetoric class, we also talk about Gutenberg, but this is such an important pivotal moment. And we know that typesetting, which now happens with desktop publishing and in an online environment, so we don't even really think about it, was so important for the democratization of the consumption of information, whether it was the Bible or whether it was a scientific treatise. Okay, so the emergence of scientific journals and government-funded research had significant impacts on the recording of scientific data and processes in writing. Okay, so the exigencies of war, as he says, propelled scientific innovation as well as practices of technical communication. In the countries that were major players in the world wars and sort of the quote unquote leaders in the Industrial Revolution, this was absolutely true. Other countries, technical communication, academic presence was not tied in the same way to the war effort in those countries. And I'll probably bring that up other times this semester, but I don't have time to go into it right now. So O'Hara writes that technology and the logistics of battle became complicated and required standardized procedures, definitions, descriptions, instructions, and training. These processes had to be recorded and replicated. So he traces a long arc for the development of the profession of technical communication, and he signals the way that the internet era changed job roles. We can see a new era, that of AI, as I already suggested, having another potentially seismic effect on the TPC profession. So the closure of the field's professional organization, I have their logo on the screen, the STC, is also really significant. They had financial issues, and so they closed, I think it's going to be 2 years ago in October. And that's just left a real vacuum for technical communicators across fields of specialization and across borders. It had a large international membership. It's created this vacuum where people are feeling like, I think that there's a sort of a lack of this cohering organization, although there's a large technical communication professional organization in Europe. So there's that. Okay, so now jumping into this Buehler essay, which I love for its granularity. I love that this woman really wanted to codify these terminologies that she and her colleagues encountered in their work as technical writers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is sort of like on the leading edge of like technical writing, which we're going to return to when we get to the Allen reading soon. So this is technical writing in its most sort of like technical sense, right? And this was written in the early 80s. So her article gets at the heart of one maddening issue in TPC. What do we even mean by technical and professional communication? And more specific to her study, what do we mean by editing? My undergraduate students sometimes say, Dr. Newmark, I want to come into your office hours and so you can edit my paper. And I'm like, I don't think we're understanding editing in the same way. Or maybe what they are envisioning is me doing what you see here on the screen, as just sort of like redlining it and pointing out like grammatical and syntactical things that they should change. But that's only one understanding of editing, right? So between O'Hara's and Buehler's essays, we can see the macro sort of story of technical communication and then the micro issues that challenge the field definitionally. So I wonder like what you thought of the range of descriptions of what a copy editor does, or what an editor does. So an editor serves in many roles. And I love how she said from salesman to chaplain. And if you talk to technical writers at Sandia National Labs, and we have several on our TPC board, they really reflect this. They're like, sometimes you have to sell your services to people in other units in Sandia, like you could really benefit from working with a technical writer. And then the chaplain part is like sort of like being a spiritual advisor about the merits of their work or helping to guide them towards a presentation, like really supporting them and talking with them about like all kinds of more like emotion adjacent matters related to their writing, right? Because writing is a very personal, emotional thing often, even if it's like very technical and seems to be sitting apart from, like writing a poem that's exclusively about the emotional journey. Sometimes they do get closer than you might think. So she emphasizes this role of the technical writer as the rhetorical navigator. So if the editor is doing a good job, she writes, the image of the reader is always hovering in the picture too. This rhetorical situation with the editor squarely in the middle between the author and the potential audience has given rise to the useful metaphor of the editor as bridge builder and bridge tester. So at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the 1970s, Buehler and her co-author Van Buren and colleague categorized types of edit: coordination edit, policy edit, integrity edit, screening edit, copy clarification edit, format edit, mechanical style edit, language edit, and substantive edit. And those are all described in our article. And I hope that you thought carefully about them as you went through and thought about whether you recognize any of these from work that you've done, whether in academia or like in a job somewhere else. Okay, and also she discusses style and format and some of the terminological nuances there. Okay, this video I know is already too long, but let me keep going. I love this essay, this Durack essay. I've taught it many times. It's just so great. It really resonates with me. I'm going to try to just mostly read from my slides, but I put some other things on there that I thought were generative. So the fundamental question Durack asks is what is and what is not technical communication? But relatedly, what is a workplace and what is work? How much have you thought about this? Sometimes, for example, a kitchen is not just a kitchen. It is a space in which women support war efforts. I've shown this image from World War I here. The kitchen is the key to victory, and it says eat less bread, and it shows this woman cooking something that presumably is not bread. There's so much visual propaganda from World War I and World War II about the woman's role in the kitchen being constitutive of like a successful war effort, or like she's a collaborator or a co-fighter in the war effort. So this depicts that too. So the kitchen is not just a kitchen. It's not just a place where you create things to nourish your family or yourself. And it's also not just a place where women make possible men's workplace earnings. I included two screen captures from videos from TikTok that are also on like Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. But I've seen these where it's a video of a woman like, come with me as I make lunch to pack in my husband's lunchbox for him to take to work. So this one woman here in the middle, she's making lunch for her husband. And this one woman down here is making lunch for her husband. And I've seen many of these. And so these are indeed in domestic spaces, and it is the woman performing this act. I don't really think it's configured as her helping him work and make money for their family. So I wonder about the actions of the women in these spaces as they perform a role of domestic science, right? They're domestic scientists, in fact. They know how much fuel their husband needs, presumably. Sometimes you see them making larger lunches, smaller lunches. And I wonder how much, I'm not talking about these women in particular, but that kind of role and the fact that it's like marketed as viewable content for people who are curious about this, like, is it valued as work? Or is it the expected labor of man's helpmate? And certainly there could be a man getting up early to make lunch for his wife, especially in this era. But in the top image about women, their role in the kitchen is being helpful to the war effort, that was definitely gendered in a very specific way. Okay, so combating the privileging of agency is something that Durack is very concerned about. Agency is a specific term of women not having historically originated scientific discoveries. I mean, supposedly, right? We know that's not true. And then technological significance. So these are some of the determinants of like something that's technical writing. Is it agentive, and does it have technological significance relative to the person who's the composer? So women's practices and tools are thought of as like not technological enough, like a sewing machine or like any kind of kitchen equipment, right? So women's relationships are to machinery are coded again in like really specific ways. Like you have this Rosie the Riveter iconography. And Rosie the Riveter, as Durack discusses, or like any woman using machinery, is the one who uses the machinery on like quite a surface level. Like you see these women, riveting things to something else, but they're not the ones who supposedly fix the machine. That's coded in a more masculine way. Like they know how to take the machine apart and rebuild it and fix it, but the woman can use it. Again, these are the historical stereotypes. So women in technical skills, like these ideas about what place women are situated in vis-a-vis technologies, has a lot to do with why they're largely absent from technical communication history. So women in technical skills, I often think about sewing, right? So sewing as a hobby is often understood as a woman's hobby, but it's a woman interacting with a machine and interacting with schematic diagrams, right? Which are sewing patterns, which are a 2D rendering of something that is three-dimensional, highly complicated. I love how she mentioned the woman who invented the bias cut in sewing, because I'm really interested in sewing. And I think a few of you in this class are also really interested in sewing. So hopefully you caught that too. So She also discusses what the site of technical writing is. Like, where does technical writing happen? Does it happen only in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or does it happen in the domestic space? So she argues in 1997 that we must challenge the dualistic thinking that severs public and private, household and industry, and masculine and feminine labor. So how do you think we're doing with this call to challenge such dualisms all these years later? I'm just wondering what you think about that. So, do you understand technology, such as in technical writer, to still have something to do always with computer technology? Like when you think of technical writing, and our program is technical and professional communication, is the technical, like technical side of that sort of like on a spectrum, the side that has more association with like technologies that are digital, electronic, or computer-based technologies? I wonder what you think. Okay, finally, the last thing we're going to talk about today. So the case against defining technical writing. So the animating concern of this article was the disqualification of a cookbook from a technical publications competition organized by the STC, back when it was a very robust organization. So what do you think? Is a cookbook an example of technical writing, or is it really just like software documentation or procedures manual, or maybe even a grant proposal, or I don't know, like a user-oriented instructional pop-up that comes up when you're doing a training online, like usability writing? Like, are those technical writing, but a cookbook isn't? So as Alan recounts, some academics have proposed that technical writing is writing that is objective and has only one meaning. One of those who attempts to define the term, Dobrin, argues that technical writing is writing that, quote, accommodates the technology to the user. So Alan doesn't buy the first part of this, which is it's objective writing and it only has one meaning. As I say many times, if you've taken any classes with me before, technical communication, whatever it is, as we even see in the highly flawed and catastrophic technical writing that accompanied the Challenger launch and later disaster, that was not like neutral. It was highly influenced by the priorities of the other engineers and managers on site the night before the launch. So it's always sort of like laden or loaded up with other concerns or values or assumptions about how other people are going to read something, right? Same with bureaucratic documentation. It's never neutral. Or bureaucratic writing, such as within a government or forms you have to fill out. Okay, so in terms of writing that accommodates the technology to the user, like I kind of understand that. It's trying to bridge this gap, right, between a technology, whether it's a software, a piece of software, and the user is going to use it. The documentation often is trying to like articulate the chain of events or the processes in between those things. Sometimes I also think of documentation, like with software documentation, that a software engineer may create as trying to record processes so that the next software engineer in the workflow understands what happens and can pick it up or see where an error might have happened or something like that. So they don't have to just imagine what happened or imagine what the motivations or processes were. So relatedly, Alan explores the debate concerning the emphasis of the different words in the field's title. Technical writing. Are we more concerned with technical or are we more concerned with writing? And the way that we emphasize either of those tells a lot about the person's priorities. Okay, so she theorizes that the technical part of the idea of technical writing has as much to do with form as it does with content. So what do you think this means? Like, what is the form of a technical writing output? And what is the form of some well-known, excuse me, professional writing outputs? Think about that. I don't have time to really go into that here. So much of what prevents a clear definition of technical writing is the subjectivity of its component part or the ideas that populate it, like clarity of prose. It is flawed thinking to suggest that there is absolutely clear writing that is so dependent on the reader. So some attempt to define technical writing on the basis of subject, on the basis of style, and on the basis of purpose. So some people attempt to do it, to define this field or this term, based on any of those, subject, style, or purpose. But she thinks there are problems with all of these approaches. So she finally concludes that we're probably better off not trying to lock down a definition. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right here. So now you can just see me and you can see all of my spools of thread and my sewing machine because it's something that I do. And it's really shaped my thinking about certain kinds of technical writing that happens in what is coded as a domestic space. But anyway, I'm really excited to be on this journey with all of you this semester. It's going to be really exciting. We're going to really read a lot of texts that really run the gamut of this whole spectrum in the interest of exposing you to some really important concepts in this field. Okay, so that's the end of the video, and I will see you in next week's highlights video.